You are listening to the Building a Legacy series on That's What I Call Marketing, a content series with Legacy Communications.
Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Don't forget to rate or review the show wherever you are listening or watching. It really helps us reach an even bigger, engaged community of marketers just like you. Before we get into today's show, if you'd like to partner with That's What I Call Marketing, get in touch or visit that'swhaticallmarketing.com/sponsor. So on to today's episode, and this is the second in our three-part series called Building a Legacy. The Building a Legacy series with That's What I Call Marketing and Legacy Communications is a look into the evolution of communications, the importance of storytelling, creating a culture of both creativity and effectiveness, and the future trends shaping the industry. There's going to be an episode like our first one that's packed full of personal stories, great examples, and some laughs along the way. This series is a comprehensive look into the foundations, growth, and processes of building and maintaining a legacy in the marketing world. So on to today's episode, which is Creativity Matters, and I'm joined by Clara, Aidan, McLaughlin, and Micheal Brennan. Claire, who's sitting here beside me, has over 18 years of experience delivering award-winning work for the likes of BT, Pampers, Borbia, Eddie Rockets, and Bondi Sands. And Claire is Legacy Communications Director of Innovation and Strategy, a role that Claire took up as a result of clients looking to radically reimagine how communications campaigns are delivered to help solve business challenges. Next up is Aidan McLaughlin, and Aidan has written this intro himself. Aidan has worked agency and client side and is passionate about storytelling and how brands can create large-scale cross-platform communications. Aidan has a unique insight into marketing and comms across many industries, B2B and B2C. And to be fair, I wrote this bit. Aidan was probably the first person I met in a comms role that really thought more broadly and probably more creatively about the role. You didn't ask me to say that. The final guest today is Micheal Brennan, who, despite Bernard Brogan's protest, is in fact the most handsome man in Ireland. You just need to Google it. Micheal is Head of Search at Legacy Communications. Now, I know what you're thinking at this stage, and as Kev Moore put it so eloquently, what the fuck has search got to do with creativity? Well, stay tuned because Micheal has so much to share that will really surprise and inform you of the role search has in creativity. So thank you all so much for joining me today. Great to have you here as part of this series. In the last episode, we heard from Kev and Bernard about the journey Legacy has been on and how, in many ways, the landscape has fundamentally changed. And one of the things that seems to be changing, but I want to get your perspective, is sort of the pigeonholing of agencies that we had probably seen in the past. Claire, from your perspective, maybe in your background, in your previous roles, you'd seen that kind of maybe a PR comms agency was asked to do one set of things.
Yeah. I think that's probably fair. Historically, I think that pigeonholing has happened, but I think we're starting to see a bit of an evolution in maybe the way clients are thinking about our role across broader spectrums. I think there's really good collaboration now between clients and agencies, which is quite nice. They're kind of becoming part of the same team. I think like anything, anyone you meet, any agency that you meet, you might have an opinion about them when you start that journey. You start to build a really nice relationship together. I think a lot of clients are starting to see that we can deliver a lot more than maybe your traditional PR campaigns. And I think for us, we are really passionate about maybe being the ideas people. That's kind of something we come back to. I'm 20 years in this industry, and just good ideas always speak to clients. So I think wherever that idea is coming from, if you've got a good collaborative relationship, you can start to kind of break through the services conversation and into something that's a bit stronger. And I think we've got really good relationships with our clients. They're very open-minded. So it's an interesting journey. It's definitely not just that's the service that we're offering you in most cases.
And we hope from a search perspective as well, again, it kind of gets pigeonholed. You've seen that evolve now? People are kind of looking at it slightly differently. We'll get into some of the examples later on, but have you seen kind of an evolution in how people perceive the role? Yeah,
and I think it's interesting when we talk about agencies getting pigeonholed. It's also interesting where people might get pigeonholed. So I wouldn't have necessarily had an opportunity to maybe flex my creative muscle until I worked in Legacy, because as you said earlier, search and SEO wouldn't necessarily be seen as something that's that creative or whatever, so kind of at the agency we've kind of evolved into, you know, having kind of specific creative groups, and that might have come from in the early days when I joined, you getting me in on a brainstorm, but from a data perspective, and then I might follow up with you after and say, hey, what about this idea, because I might not necessarily have the confidence or whatever. But then as it's grown, you start to see, like, you know, regardless of people's, you know, main role, they might have that creative flair that they're able to build towards a big campaign, you know.
And in your perspective, both, I suppose, agency and when, you know, your press releases were faxed, I guess, to client side now.
Come on for this abuse now.
I have definitely faxed a press release or two in my time, and then followed up with 11 calls, and then emailed it. And,
but how have you seen that evolve, you know, from being kind of very much, you know, one thing that a PR comms agency was asked to do?
Well, I would go back to, in some ways, the persuasion landscape has fragmented in so many ways. And so when you think about PR as a media relations function, that has shifted, but it still is predominantly the same job, which is, you know, create a story, pitch it to a journalist, and try and get it in a broadcast medium, whether that's TV, radio, digital, increasingly. But what's difficult for clients is the way they're set up internally, and whether the media team, PR team has an agency that they attach their KPIs to, and then maybe the brand team have a separate agency or come up with creative ideas, and so those ideas are somewhat locked into the KPIs that the brief sets out for them, and that's where a big idea gets lost, because if you can't execute it within your silo, you're not going to go to the hassle of trying to get the organization to realign itself to execute the big idea. So, like, that's where we have to, depends how you're set up in-house, whether or not you're sort of siloed by function, or there is an ability to bring all ideas to the table. And then, you know, I've been in plenty of meetings where you have all the different agencies. There's a great idea, but the biggest budget agency wins because they're able to shoot down the, you know, so the battleground for great ideas to come through is very complex. So it's not just as simple as, well, we've got a great idea. There's a lot more that comes into the whole process.
And understanding the complexity of a client's organisation, I think, is key. Claire, you touched on some of the relationships that you have, you know, at Legacy, and kind of maybe those starting points being one thing, but you're kind of able to maybe build a relationship across the business. How has that kind of happened and helped?
We probably live and die by relationships. Like, and I think what's become really important is that clients can see, if we've got a really good relationship, they can see our potential. They can see what we have to offer. Those conversations naturally evolve. You start to talk about things that you could deliver. Sometimes you're just bashing ideas back and forth with them around solving business problems. And again, you're into a different space. You've got a better seat at the table. I think as well, the PR landscape has changed in terms of the media as well. Like, there is just a lot more competition now. Certainly when I started, a lot of it would have been around relationships with media, and some of that meant the story wasn't as strong as it should be or it could be, because you were maybe leaning into a personal relationship that you've built with a journalist. I think that's completely changed now. I think your story, your campaign, your idea has to be brilliant to land. We've got more competition in terms of agencies. We've got really brilliant young people coming through that have amazing ideas. So I think it's quite a refreshing space to be in. The idea has to be solid now, really, really solid. It has to be solid every single time. Picking up the phone to a journalist doesn't necessarily work. You know, they've got less space, but there's more publications, there's more competition. So I think that's kind of refreshing as well, like just really solid thinking every single time. I
was going to just add there, like you mentioned about the relationship side of things. So, like, often the most important thing is being able to sell the idea to the client, you know, and I think in Ireland a lot of businesses tend to be kind of fairly risk averse, you know, so by building that relationship with the client, you're able to kind of sell the idea to them and maybe get that little bit more time to be able to explain it and kind of really tease it out with them. Like, you know, it's a conversation that we were kind of having the other day. Like, sometimes you might come into maybe a pitch or with an idea and you might even undersell it because you're like, oh, you know, we thought of this, it's really great, but it might not be for you. You know, you're kind of almost hesitant to kind of bring in that big idea sometimes as well, like, you know.
But that could work. That could work sometimes.
Yeah. That bit of reverse psychology, like.
You know, you may not like it. I know someone who will.
We really like this idea, but it's not quite for you. I think you're just a bit risk averse. And I'm like, you know,
what do I want to hear? I won't even show it to you.
Yeah, so, but in the selling of the idea, there is theatre involved in the selling of the idea, and the theatre is not 15 minutes of crowds, and we're brilliant. or we are so brilliant that we came up with this fascinating insight. But it's like, how do you set exactly like the theater of bringing to life the story, but within that, helping them understand that you understand their business and the challenges that they face. And then the unlock is the creative idea, not the creative idea itself. Like that's sometimes what happens.
Yeah, you go straight to
we're so enamored with our creativity, we forget that the unlock for the creativity is you have this awful problem or you have this issue that you can't solve. You know, we understand that. What if we could solve it for you? Now here's something amazing that we come up with, you know.
We've a really strict way of delivering ideas now, and we've really worked hard on this, but it's kind of identifying a really strong insight, and a lot of that comes from clients' pain points or the target audience's pain points. So that insight, and we spend a lot of time on this before we deliver any idea to anyone, and then it's kind of into your observation. Where could you go with this? And then the idea comes, because a bit to your point, Aidan, having that kind of sense of theatre, but taking them on the journey of the idea as well. Like just cold presenting ideas can be quite difficult, responding quite bluntly to a brief. I do think you need to walk people through it.
I'd love to talk about the insights a little bit, because actually I've been doing a bit of work recently, kind of going back over a lot of the transcripts from the past 80 episodes of That's What I Call Marketing.
That word came up before, has it, the insight?
No. This is the first time it's come up, which is really shocking. No. That's the big surprise.
Revelation.
That's what I call what?
An insight. But like it's so important. And I remember, you know, previously I worked on this stuff, you know, insights, and you'd labour over words almost. Like, is that enough to articulate the insight? At Legacy, maybe, do you have, like, how do you go about kind of unearthing the insight?
Yeah, so we've built out a really stringent process, and I know we're on a creativity episode. Who wants to talk about processes? Absolutely nobody. But I actually do, because, you know, I suppose that kind of lone ranger idea of a creative person just doesn't exist. And for us, we are genuinely trying to build across the agency a team of people who play a role in creativity. So rather than having a creative team, everybody has a job in the creative process. So our process literally brings everybody into the mix. You may not be the traditional creative person. I certainly haven't. I did a commerce degree. I was all about accountancy and definitely wasn't in my future anything creative. But actually, I'm quite diligent about processes. And I know Micheal, ironically, would be the same. He'd be slightly more traditionally creative. But it's a very simple 4-stage process. It is not reinventing the wheel. It is stuff I would have done at the beginning of my career in terms of building out a PR idea. And the first stage of that is all about exploration. It's all about what are we being listening. It's about what are we being told? What do we not have knowledge on? Where are the gaps? How do we interrogate that? How do we sometimes challenge our clients to give us some more information to answer those questions? How do we identify stuff about the target audience, who we're going after, that one is fairly well known, but what's a little bit fresh, those kind of pain points. And that's where it sounds like a very boring process in some ways. And you know, you might argue that it is, but it is unearthing some really good insights for us. Like, we're spending a lot of time in that. And I know sometimes people just think, oh my God, will you stop talking about the process? But it is working quite well. So it's kind of, we're big on exploration. We spend a lot of time on that. And then we leave it. We leave all that information on the table. There's no brainstorm. And we're into that kind of, what's our subconscious doing when we walk away from that piece of exploration, that very mundane, looking at data, unearthing conversations around that target audience. And then we just leave it. We go away and we work on something else. And then we come into kind of conscious ideation is probably the next phase, where we're actually around a table. What people don't maybe even realize is there's been so much going on in their brains behind the scenes, and people are coming into brainstorms, and it's just working a lot better for us. And then we're into kind of our quality control. And then the last phase of our better thinking process is the selling, as Micheal. That's really important, that we become really good idea salespeople. Like, if we're going to stand in front of a client, and Micheal has said it as well, we've done 3 phases, we've done them really well. And then we just don't perform on the day. We're not convincing anyone that this is a good enough idea. So those insights, those observations, we tell the clients ideas we left behind and why they weren't good enough. They can quality check the ideas with us. They can see the journey we've been on, so it's not so cold. And sometimes the client even comes into that 4-stage process as well. We might bring them in early, and this is the collaboration piece that if I could do that every time, I would. Yeah. Clients don't always have the time, but when they're on that journey with us, it's just the best ideas, honestly. Like, it's
well, what I like about what you're talking about within your process is, real creativity has to exist within constraint.
Yeah.
So like by constraining it within a process, you might say that's boring, but that's actually where an insight may emerge from the pressure testing of like, it has to fit in with the set of parameters that we lay down. But within that, you have to then say, well, you know, we don't know what the best answer is going to be. That there's humility baked into that, because the enemy of creativity is also certainty.
Yeah.
You know, it has to work this way. It's worked before this way, and that locks you into a certain way of being.
Yeah.
And finally, the countervailing forces to have have a team working on the opposite of the insight.
Yeah.
And coming back to that idea of the counterfactual thinking. So instead of a brainstorm, you're saying, you know, how could a competitor do it? Switch the parameters. And play around in that area for a while, because I think what happens with a process, if it's too formulaic, it just becomes a system for the same thing emerging every time, right?
What If Innovation is a great example of a company that was all about process. And I was lucky to go through their training. But even some of the principles you're talking about are exactly the things that they use. You know, and even I love what you call the subconscious idea, and letting things sit with you. And one of the things I learned from that was they would say that the bad idea will die. The bad idea will eventually fall away. You keep giving it enough energy.
Spend millions of
before
dollars. Sometimes that's the case.
Yeah. Apple.
I actually, let's not bring.
We got that. But Micheal, in terms of like, you know, your world, I guess, and you know, Claire's alluded to there, you're probably quite process as well, but creative, you know, as well. How are you bringing the two of those together?
Yeah, so I suppose probably with data first of all. So, and actually I'm kind of maybe moving away from that data. So again, like where I would have started in terms of our creative process would have been to kind of maybe validate data, or how can we prove this, or how can we prove that. But oftentimes the best ideas, you know, come from the gut, and then you're looking for the data to be able to validate. And I suppose, like, you know, to Clara's point in the subconscious, that's the one thing that I find really useful about the whole process, because all of that research and everything that you do to get there, you know, really feeds everything into your mind, and being able to take that step away from it and let your subconscious mind work is kind of like, so some of the best ideas that we've probably maybe had might have come, you know, a week after that process is finished, and you're you know, you're walking along the street, you see a sign for pizza or whatever, and you're like, okay, there's the thing that sparked.
I do love the fact that, you know, and I completely agree with it, ideas can come from anywhere and everywhere, and everyone has permission to have ideas. That's a big cultural shift potentially in, I'm not necessarily in legacy as such, but it can be a big cultural shift to say to people that permission is there. You know, we believe you all have ideas. Micheal, how's your experience been of kind of that, and kind of feeling that, again, and I don't want to labour on the point, but like, people aren't necessarily going to go search, it's performance, it's in that sort of bucket, but actually, Micheal, we think you're going to have as creative an idea as an ECD would have.
But I think that, and before, because I think it's, but I do want to just again point to it. It's like people search for information to make sense of their world. Why would it not be a place?
But most people don't think of it like that.
Right, but that's, again, we're locked into our like perception as reality. I think this way, so it must be true. But reality has a different perspective. It's actually you're only seeing a slice of reality, you know. So
so
it's unfair to you, I think. I'm on your side.
Cheers, Aidan. Thanks very much. So I suppose, like, at the end of the day, right, if we just simplify it down, my job is just, you know, not to just, but it's to rank websites on Google, you know, to get that attention and drive traffic to the people's websites, right? So that's the primary focus, and as you say, it might not necessarily be seen as something that's that creative. But I suppose when you look at Google, and without trying to get too technical about things, it focuses on two things. It focuses on the content of the page and the authority of the website, you know. And one of the ways to, you know, really drive those rankings is by having a more authoritative website. So, you know, to make a website more authoritative, you need links from other websites. There is where you get into digital PR, which is where you're trying to get attention from the media, get links from the media, get mentions or brand mentions from the media, and that's what's going to push the person up the ranking. And I suppose to get that attention from the media, you usually have to have a fairly creative idea. Now, there's the other side of it as well in the search results, and like, you know, if you Google something, fair enough, something's going to be ranking first or whatever, but like, you know, you want to grab someone's attention, you know. So if you're ranking second or third, you want to have a title tag that's there that's going to grab someone's attention. And then I suppose on the paid ad side of things and like the paid search side of things, like there's been some really interesting campaigns. Like I know you mentioned one before from, was it Snickers?
Yeah,
where they like, you know, they had a massive search campaign where they were using keywords for all sorts of things, such as like, you know, lunch near me, sandwiches nearby or whatever, and like they just ran massive search ads with like, you know, are you hungry? You know, or you're not you when you're hungry.
Yeah.
Get a Snickers bar. Like,
They
you know,
actually
so there's a good opportunity.
They had a campaign around misspelling because you're not new when
right.
you're hungry. And I just thought it was just
Yeah.
genius all the way through from that,
that was
brilliant idea all the way through to kind of PPC and SEO, and it was just brilliant. And even when we're talking about Micheal coming into brainstorms and maybe opening it up and telling everybody they have the potential to be in the creative conversation, you're also getting diversity of thinking. You know, sometimes you're talking to the same group of people or we're all in the same brainstorms. By bringing in people from different walks of life, different areas of the business, like they're generating amazing insights. They don't even know they're doing it. They're saying something in a room that you're like, potentially that thinking wouldn't have come if we didn't have someone like Micheal in the room.
I would have heard like definitely a lot in the first year is like, oh, I'd have never thought of it that way, or we'd have never looked at it the way that you've just looked at it or whatever.
Right.
You know?
So up until that point, the reality of search was something entirely different than the potential.
But it's an afterthought often, I think. You know,
It's not even an afterthought.
It's not a
just
thought.
It's a no thought until you're exposed to thought.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I think that's the point here. With like when we're talking about why does creativity matter, it's because you can't see it unless you're exposed to something akin to it. Like you can't find the pattern if the pattern doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So if you've only exposed yourself to a certain type of media, to a certain type of voice, to a certain type of thing, that's your reality. So how are you going to have creative connection if you haven't exposed yourself to more things?
Well, one thing that's probably quite brilliant actually is there aren't as many rules for us. You know, we're not in the advertising industry as such where brilliant ideas kind of are perceived to come from all the time, which they absolutely do. For us, we're kind of creating our own rule book in another way as a communications agency, and how we do ideas and where they come from, and potentially have the opportunity to be a bit more open-minded because there isn't this kind of long tradition behind us. We're kind of just doing it our own way.
Have you had to, I mean, we've talked a bit about the process, but outside of the process, have you had to kind of create or establish almost like some behaviours that are working? Because I think that can really, really help. Yeah,
I mean, spent a lot of time on our values, which, you know, we've very simplified values, but for us two really important ones are curious and brave. And I mean, we genuinely try to talk about them all the time. Again, we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but for us that the curiosity bit is really important. Our USP is all about exploration now, and we live that every day. You know, it's not just on the walls, it is something we're really trying to push through, that people do see a little bit more, they look a little bit harder, they notice the world around them, they're not living in their bubble. Aidan, you mentioned already, sometimes you're sitting in a brainstorm and people use their own reference point, which is a natural thing to do, but actually to think outside that. We've had some really unusual audiences, you know, in terms of briefs. Like we did a campaign for Amgen, a big pharma, around women over 65 and osteoporosis. I mean, it's a very tricky brief. It's not the type of thing that someone in their 20s is, you know, running into that brainstorm necessarily.
It's not electric picnic.
It's not electric picnic, exactly. And, you know, that's sometimes they're the best briefs. They're the ones that are actually quite exciting. They might seem it on paper. How do we get women over 65 to take action when it comes to their bone health? And that started a really long and interesting conversation about who are women over 65. There's lots of assumptions made about them. There is quite negative conversations sometimes. And for us, it was, you know, identifying really interesting things, doing a lot of reading, immersing ourselves in that audience, which again isn't reinventing the wheel, but for someone who's in their 20s or 30s, it's quite a new landscape. And what we did unearth was amazing things about these incredible and vibrant women who are weightlifting, they're traveling a lot, they're often major carers for their grandchildren. In the main, a lot of them are fit and healthy, but their bone health goes down the line. So how do we start to really generate something that has an emotional impact to these women? But you're starting all that research and you're understanding them a little bit better, you're understanding what they care about, you're throwing your assumptions out the window. And, you know, really they were living their best lives. That was like a phrase that somebody in their 20s could absolutely understand. These women potentially were in a better financial place. They weren't working. They were going on really nice holidays. Yeah, it sounds amazing. It sounds amazing. But, you know, you start...
65-year-old woman.
Yeah. Oh, to be one, I'm so close. I'm nearly there. Yay. And what we did understand was, like, you know, a bone break would be something that would just be detrimental to this brilliant life that they're living. So we started to talk about them not deserving a break, which seemed kind of counterintuitive, but actually landed quite well with them. And that became a campaign like that actually started potentially in a PR idea, ended up in a really good content series, ended up on TV, and delivered amazing results for a fairly niche audience. Like, people took action, and that creative effectiveness conversation kind of came into play. Micheal joined the conversation.
Ask about that.
Yeah, and it was interesting, like, in terms of results. That was an award-winning campaign.
Being able to prove the results was probably something that you wouldn't have necessarily been able to do as concretely before. Like, and I suppose again, that's where me and my team would come in as well, in terms of that data and the analytics. You know, so I suppose, you know, PR over the last number of years wouldn't have necessarily had that full insight, you know, into the next step of what's happening. Obviously, you know, if you put out a really good campaign and this company sales go up, it's fairly obvious, but it's still, you know, not possible to fully tie it all the way there. But then with the analytics and being able to tie it back to, you know, the pages on the website you were driving to, how many people did it actually went through and did the test that we came up with, and those kind of bits, to be able to show this is actually a really positive ROI campaign, you know.
It's and I think that measurement piece, because again, traditionally it was our media value, you know what I mean, which, you know, probably I think it still gets used by traditional PR, which is definitely, you know, needs a metric, but, you know, adding a different layer of perspective to the measurement probably is seeing clients kind of, you know, warm to the additional value that you're adding, and may go back to the point that you were making, Aidan, about understanding the business and the business problems, and I think it can sometimes be hard for agencies to do that and understand that, and sometimes to be fair, it's the client not sharing enough information. From your perspective, being both sides, what are the things people can do on either side to kind of break that down a bit?
Yeah, I think so my best client agency relationships, whether I was the agency representative or the client, was fostering that information sharing and sort of feeling like you're on the inside. But I think, you know, it's difficult sometimes. So, like, again, like when the agency is billing you by the hour, come in and we'll talk to you for an hour about our business, feels like, you know, how do I tell my boss and the accounts department the value of that hour or two? But I think, and then sometimes the client, like what I used to do was, you know, I wouldn't bill for that time because that's like my curiosity. So how do you get to a stage where you're so shared in the success that, you know, they're an extent, like I would always have felt any agency that I ever worked with, they were an extension of my team, not the agency, you know. So I've seen the relationship work badly when it's like you bring in the agency to talk to your boss because you're afraid of the ideas, right? And then, but you're also, when it goes wrong, you blame the agency.
And you get a new one.
But the reality is the agency, obviously the people within the agency matter, and when you find an amazing person on the agency side, you hold on because that's amazing. But they shouldn't be separate to your team delivering a service, right? You're like, they should be extended part of your team, so their success is your success, so you should feed them as much information as they need, so if they ever do go up in front of a VP or an SVP, they feel so briefed. And that's just taking that extra step to really be curious. And I think curiosity is one of the most important things, and within my own team, the way we try and foster that creativity is like when we meet as a team weekly, the first thing we do is, what inspired you? Like, what piece of creative inspired you this week?
It's the opposite of what the guys at What If Innovation talk about, and the poo in the pool, right? Which is the terrible analogy of, if you're at a pool party and someone goes, there's a poo there, everyone jumps out because no one wants to be at a party with the poo in the pool. But giving permission for people to bring the idea and having soft eyes, heart eyes to it, and kind of going, this is great, more people are going to jump into the pool. Like, that's creating a culture.
And what it's doing, it's also creating connection points.
Yeah.
Because if you have, so I have a team, they're all doing different things, but that session allows them to find connection points. And then suddenly they're sharing ideas within their functions and finding connection points. And that's where the creative ideas emerge from that, but it's a muscle. It's not like, oh, I've got 3. They are incredibly creative people, but they're exercising their creativity every day. I think that's really important.
Sometimes you forget as well, like, this is supposed to be fun. Like, this is actually quite playful. Like, you know, I mean, I've spent the last 20 minutes talking about processes, so I've killed that very quickly. I know.
Kids want to play, but when you give them a game, they really love it.
Yeah, you're right.
There's an operating system for the fun, and we want that.
Yeah. I know, actually, sometimes I'll say to my kids, you're half in jest, but you're really like pulling your hair out. You can't come up with an idea. And like, they're the ones who'll just come up with something. They're like, hold everything. I'm definitely not going to tell you when my 10-year-old came up with this, but I'm taking her idea and I'm going to run with it. So like, you know, I mean, kids are brilliant and we don't want to lose all that. Me and my process is killing everything. But there's definitely both worlds that live. Like, you've got to get to a point where it's quite playful and it's fun, and like you can forget about the brief a bit, and you can really throw those ideas out there, and you create that kind of playful culture as well. I think that's where you really win.
But then the process helps move it along, because otherwise it's just like a student's
exactly. There's maybe your action.
It's getting wasted.
We do that too. Sometimes there's a bit of that, you know, whatever gets you through.
I think if you set that up, then you can be. Is it Paul Dervin, who we both worked with, talks about being hard on the ideas.
It's actually Russell came
was
from.
Russell
Lambrecht.
Russell.
Hard on ideas, soft on the people, or something like that.
But I think if you've set up the parameters to play in that arena, then you can be, because then there's playfulness within the criticism and the critique.
Well, that's the thing, exactly, because people definitely struggle with, or can struggle with feedback, because again, it goes back to the pool. It's like,
my career.
Really.
Like PR, I always said, was like, you know, it's not the most important thing in the world, but when you are starting out in PR, you're writing your ideas down, you're writing quotes, you're putting your ideas and your essence onto a page, and it's either being torn up by the people in the organization, the agency, or the journalist, and that feels so deeply
so personal.
I remember getting a direct mail I did for a non-profit when I worked in non-profits, and sent it upstairs because we were in the basement. we were fundraising, and sent it upstairs, and it literally came back with red marks.
Like, we've all been there.
Am I 7?
But it stings.
It hurts. It stings.
It hurts, and like I don't think you ever get to the point where you don't sort of attach yourself, identify with your ideas, but the more you can sort of create space for, okay, I put this stuff out, now it's separate to me to be judged and iterated upon
and deconstructed,
and that's okay. And then also realizing sometimes people are wrong. They may be more senior and they get the final say and they're wrong, and you have to live with that. That's okay as well. That's okay.
The worst.
They're wrong.
But like once it leaves you, it is no longer yours. It exists separate to you, and you have to just try and deal with that.
It's still frustrating. I want to touch a bit. We talked about kind of culture of creativity, but also culture. You know, you've talked about kind of the exploration, and Micheal, I think, you know, with your role as well, you're very much kind of rapid response unit to some of the things go on. And I would imagine as well, you're very kind of tapped in to culture. I know personally you did something recently around the portal, you know. So how are you kind of embracing culture, and how are you rapidly responding? And you can use the cork.
So I suppose that's a good example of just doing something quickly and not really thinking much about it, which is, you know, completely counterproductive to everything we've said so far. But so obviously the portal has been big news for the last couple of weeks. Last week I saw a tweet from a guy called Simon Murdoch, and he's a guy from Cork. He was saying if Cork had a portal, it would just be to another part of Cork. And I'm like, this is hilarious. Like, and also I was like, okay, I can give this a little bit of legs. So I just used one of the AI tools to imagine it, roll up a little bit of a fake press release or whatever, and post it on LinkedIn. And it was just like, it's been extremely viral for the last week. But yeah, in terms of, you know, real life work, so that's okay to, you know, build maybe a bit of legacy brand and my own personal brand. But like in terms of real life work, what we've started to do is bring in a process. Basically, what we're starting to do now is meet and look at, you know, big campaigns that we've liked, whether they were 10 years ago or 1 year ago, what landed last week, what's currently trending, you know. So I suppose depending on when this goes out, like, you know, Bridgerton is coming up in the next couple of weeks. Obviously the portal is huge news, Baby Reindeer and stuff like that. So it's just to, you know, come in and without necessarily having any other purpose other than knowing what's going on. We're coming in with our research done and just literally talk about what's current now, what happened last week, and what is coming in the next couple of months. And that can allow you then to kind of have planned reactive. Sometimes we might come up with ideas and they might not even necessarily be for one of our specific clients, you know, but like, you know, with Bridgerton coming up, there might be something that we could use and then either bring it to our client or potentially do it for ourselves. But I suppose, yeah, in terms of the culture, it's, you know, just scrolling through TikTok, scrolling through Twitter, you know, RT News and everything else, and seeing what's kind of basically trending and what's coming up at that time to be able to jump on. And there's just so much stuff that you can do for businesses to relate to those trends, you know. And
clients being set up then to be able to react and respond to that with, like, Paddy Power had Emer McCarthy on the show when she was a Paddy Power, and they're set up to do just exactly that, but then also react immediately. So how does that work then? You know, you've got, let's say you observe something like, God, this would be brilliant for this client. Is there a process? Is there a process then for that kind of moving quickly? Are there some clients that naming them, but there's some clients that are actually set up to kind of go, yeah, we want that?
Yeah, it's fully client dependent. And actually what we will try and do as well when we start with a new client, so like we'll say with the digital PR side, we'll have like hero campaigns, which might be those big ideas and looking at data or a stunt or whatever. Then we'll do newsjack in reactive where we're monitoring for those things. What we'll try and do with each client is have an interview with them, you know, when we start working with them, and kind of again try and predict some of those things that might happen. Like, you know, so as an example, we're talking to an online travel agent at the moment, and you know, one of the questions that we could probably ask them in an interview would be to, you know, if an airline's going to go out of business, what would their comment? Because like pretty much every year there's some airline goes out of business, you know, so like having a couple of things that you probably would know will happen to have that planned reactive where you've got the quote there and it's ready to go and it's already signed off. But then, yeah, sometimes it can just be a case of, and like last year we would have had a good example where the CAO results were coming out. One of our clients had a kind of an interesting career journey to his point, you know, where he hadn't necessarily got the course he wanted and everything else. So we knew his journey, we knew the CEO results were coming out, so we put out kind of a quick reactive piece from him to say, you know, if you didn't get the points that you want, don't worry about it. This is what happened to me and this is where I am now, you know. So it can depend, like obviously we'll try and have as much planned and ready to go, but sometimes it can just be like a quick text message or a phone call, come here, this is actually, you know, for you and we need to get it out there.
You just mentioned Baby Reindeer without going into the plot line there, but like nobody expected that to be something, so sometimes you just can't expect, with all the planning in the world, you can't expect that will be something. Now whether a client reacts to Baby Reindeer or not, I don't know.
So maybe Diet Coke. There's quite a few businesses that we discussed this actually, there's quite a few that have reacted. Now again, I think this is your level of risk and how fast you'll move, and we were saying it's a lot of smaller businesses have done this. You know, it's lawyers in the space have commented, anti-stalking experts have commented, and you know, they're getting a lot of coverage. Like they're really getting a lot of coverage by moving quite quickly and becoming the leader in that space, you know. And if you're just in the right business and you spot the opportunity, and that's our job, is to spot that opportunity and go to a client and go, listen, we've got this. If you can move quickly, if you're willing to sign this off, we've put this together. We think it's a really good opportunity for you here. And I think it just has to be authentic. I think that's probably the really important bit. Trying to push yourself into a space that, you know, isn't your lane and it's not your area of expertise doesn't work, and nobody's buying that. So. Yeah, it is. It's interesting. And Aidan, just from your perspective, maybe in the client side, you talked a bit about before kind of different teams, departments. And I think no matter how big or small you are, that can happen. Even smaller organisations, there can be weird silos. But how do you think a client can maybe be set up to be reactive? I think risk is one thing. Well, I think what you hit upon, I was just thinking about it there in that, like, if you have established the point of view and what are the set of things that match our values and our as an organisation, these are the types of stories we want to be attached to. This is what we care about. This is the change we want to see. And then you know broadly the story you're going to tell. I think the CAO example is great. It's like we have a founder story that's unconventional that could help kids think about their career pathways. Okay, CAO is perfect. Pre-prepare. It's like the agencies do it all the time for the budget. It's like, exactly. We are a tax advisory company, so we're going to have a perspective on the changes within income tax and package it up and make it as pithy as possible and get that out. So because I think it's a really dangerous game, chasing culture, if you're chasing it just to get attention, because you can get yourself into awful trouble. I think it's really dangerous. So you have to establish what are the things we care about, and then
maybe look at the calendar and say there are things or reactive things that we will go for.
Yeah.
But everybody is on the same page, and legal has cleared.
Yeah. You know, you have to be very careful how you do this, and I think, you know, it's definitely kind of measured and considered risk is what you have to do when you're being reactive, and you have to have it well set up. There has to be a really good process in place.
I was going to say that.
I mean, it
100%.
seems counterintuitive. This
Yeah.
Reactive is very rarely completely reactive.
Yeah.
Like, you understand the risk your client's willing to take. To your point, there might have been legal thinking coming up to it. How are we going to navigate this? How are we going to do this in an authentic way? How are we going to be careful about how we do it? But we know the opportunity is there.
And also, I think just understanding that risk, but having boundaries in place, and, you know, getting carried away, though, I think can happen. Right? You've seen it where somebody will come with an idea and you go, oh, that's deadly, let's go with it. And that's probably the moment where you go, okay, like anything, don't reply to that email. You know, take a moment.
And you've seen social media
Yeah.
managers run a
where they all want to be the Ryanair.
Turning off our
you know.
calendar.
and just you know,
Turn off
sending
the
it out there, and you know, it's dangerous. And also, I think you have to be like this reactive space. I think you have to be really considered about the ethical implications of what you're jumping onto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about creativity. We've talked a lot about process in creativity, which I honestly didn't necessarily expect coming into this, but it's actually so important, you know, as we talked about, because we all have that experience of the importance of process and having guardrails, kind of creating that culture, that permission people have. I just love to touch on technology, and we kind of barely touched on it a little bit, but the role technology, as you're seeing it, is having in maybe the good and the bad for enabling creativity. Clara?
I'm excited. I'm excited about technology, and I'm not very good at it. So, like, I'm a bit old school. I'm 43, and I don't want to do myself down. I'm obviously very cool. But I actually went to an AI event recently in Google, and I thought it was the commercial creative industry. It was just an incredibly interesting, kind of empowering event. Like, the possibilities with AI, and like, obviously that's the obvious piece of technology to be talking about, was just insane. Like, it really was. Like, and I think collectively everybody agreed, and we had taken this standpoint ourselves, like, we're not worried about AI. Like, it's absolutely going to enhance what we're doing from a creative perspective, from a day-to-day perspective. And we took that very early on, and we were like, I don't think we've anything to worry about. At the moment, AI isn't generating the ideas that humans do, but it is so powerful what's coming out. And it was just a brilliant event. Like, the government were there. Simon Coveney was talking about the investment in the commercial creative sector, the opportunity, and this was 100% an AI event. Like, so it was really reassuring. I think it's just an incredible pivotal point for the industry at the moment. It's probably an inflection point like no other. So that's exciting. And I think it's opening up more creative jobs. Like, if you are a creative AI expert, like, there's so many places for you to go. There's so much that we need from that conversation. So I think it's brilliant. I think technology is only enhancing what we do as a general rule of thumb. That's not to say there aren't some risks. Obviously, we have to be careful how we do it. We have to be ethical, you know, all those conversations that are happening. There's lots of unknowns in that as well. You know, how are we generating copy? Where does that sit? Who owns that copy? Whose thinking is it? So there's a lot to navigate in it, but overall I think we're really positive about AI.
Aidan, anything to add? To you positive?
I would say
Cautiously optimistic.
So Ian McGilchrist, who a lot of System 1's research is based on, I was looking at a lecture he was giving about AI, and he was like, first thing we need to do is stop thinking about AI as artificial intelligence, think about artificial processing, and it is processing the output of human endeavor in the artistic field for as long as, you know, it has been around. So that's powerful.
Yeah, really powerful.
It's a powerful research tool. It's very efficient in creating structure for if you're trying to write a long speech or a press release, it can give you structure really quickly. But if it prevents you from taking a pen and writing, opening a book and reading, going outside and walking, trying to play a music, like trying to act in a creative way, then that'll deaden your pattern recognition. You won't be as creative as you can. So you have to be, I think as an individual, you have to be incredibly disciplined about how you interact with the tools, because they are so powerful. and yet, as you said, they're built upon all the IP of whoever went before us. And so I use it, especially when I'm under pressure. I use it, but I've gotten it wrong. I've used it and I've sent stuff off, and then I've read it back and I'm like, that was terrible.
Piece that says
Or
this is being generated by ChatGPT.
Well,
you forgot to delete that part.
Well, the other thing is, if you could go into your LinkedIn now, you see the ChatGPT.
I actually experimented with that for the crack.
You know, it's got the 3 paragraphs, the little emojis, and then the wrap up at the bottom. And that's, I think, the spam apocalypse that's about to be unleashed on us all, because it's
people
so
are even doing it
easy.
in comments as well. They're using AI to comment, like, you know, just
and
for
you can fire it out.
engagement.
Imagine you train the AI to AI respond. It's just
Micheal, anything
concerning?
Yeah, I suppose like that. Overall positive. Like, so obviously on the search side, Google have just launched a new thing called AI overviews, which is, you know, worrying for people that are trying to rank web, like for people like me, where the whole business is based on the search. It doesn't seem to be that good so far, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't improve. But I suppose, in terms of like the different processes, like, you know, speed and a spark would be the 2 things. Like, so I'll often be able to do my job a lot faster by using the help of ChatGPT or some of those other tools. Like, we work with businesses from tons of different industries, you know, so like if there's consumer PR, you're kind of in there and that's what you know, whereas like I'm working with everything from you know, a procurement software all the way over to a roommate's website all the way over to an iron supplement and everything else. So like there's a lot of different things, and hearing aids as well. So like, you know, I could tell you about a lot of different subjects just from being in them, but like when you've got that new client and you're trying to understand their business, being able to use ChatGPT or similar to kind of get that brief summary of you know, what people who are looking for that business are looking for.
But that to me is the danger in that, because it's so good at giving you the summary, you never have to wrestle with finding that yourself.
No, you do though. Like, that's kind of like where I say about the spark. You know, like, so they're the points, but then I didn't have to go and validate that and look at all the different competitors, look at the keywords, and it'll often, you know, ChatGPT might start me over here, but I end up way over
that's
there.
You. Yeah. I think a lot of people are just going,
I need that spark.
Summary, and then off we go, and that's good enough for me. And I think that's a real danger.
One nice thing I think is visualizing ideas, like just even for yourself, to just have an idea. I feel like I could see where a campaign could come to life, even just, you know, obviously using images, using video sources coming out. Like it's quite interesting to see things that traditionally we would have paid a lot of money to do in that kind of draft phase, that early stage. So it's nice to be able to visualize something, sometimes even putting it into a pitch. I've done it a couple of times. As I said, I'm not great on technology, but putting here's an image, here's what it could look like, you know, is
come back to the sell as well, like, so you know, again, traditionally you've got that big idea, and you might have, let's say, a billboard campaign idea or whatever, like, you know, and you know, the way things would have worked before, you're trying to get the graphic designer on the phone and they might be able to do it for 2 or 3 days, but you need to show it to the client today. Using the AI tools to generate something that somewhat represents what you wanted to be able to visualize can be helpful as well, like, you know, but it's not as good as the real thing.
Well, no, it's not it's amazing. It's just like what you lose in the speed is the war. It's when it comes to creativity matters is what the whole subject matter is about. And creativity matters, it's a way of getting to the idea. It's not the idea in some ways, and the build on that is what we all.
I think people use it as the only thing. Then that's where we're in trouble.
You've a world of the same. Then, like,
well,
know,
there's enough same
images with those kind of vibrant. You know the image I'm talking about. That's come out of it.
Yeah.
And you say, oh,
listen, we've about 6 or 7 people waving at us to say we're at time, so we'll have to leave it there. But listen, thank you so much for a brilliant episode on Creativity Matters, and it's really been incredible to. We heard from Kevin Byrne in the first episode, which if you haven't listened to, go back and listen to, about the journey Legacy has been on, but actually, you know, how that's coming to life, and you know, the creativity that you're bringing to clients' business problems is really great to hear. Claire, Aidan, Micheal, thank you so much for joining me. That's it for this episode of That's What I Call Marketing. As I said, do go back and listen to the first episode with Bernard and Kevin, and then we will have the 3rd episode in the series coming very, very soon. So thanks very much for tuning in.